Hi and welcome to this video. My name is Dave Hedeman. I'm the application specialist for the steel segment here at Trimble. And today I want to show you how you can create a corner base plate using the US baseplate 1047 component in Tekla structures. So recently I got an email from a customer who was trying to create a corner base plate. This was actually the image that he sent. He tried looking through the help file and he also tried looking for some existing videos and couldn't find anything to help him create this type of plate. So I thought this was a great opportunity to make a tips and tricks video. So what I've got here created is a 6x6 column, and the base plate that we're going for here I estimated to be about 9.5 inches by 9.5 inches. So I'm just assuming that the half-inch overlap is going all the way around there, and the 1.5-inch edge distance from the bolts is a standard. So what I created so far is a base plate 1047. It's installed with the default settings, with the exception of changing the anchor bolts to be a custom component. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and double click on this, and I'm going to set up first the base plate size. So like I said, I estimated this to be a 9.5 inch by 9.5 inch plate. So I'm going to go ahead and make that adjustment first and then modify the component. Next, I want to set up my number of bolts. And to do this, you have to start by thinking of these bolts as a rectangular array. So if I bring this image back up, we can see that if I work from left to right, I have 1, 2, 3 rows of bolts. And if I work from top to bottom, I have 1, 2, 3 rows of bolts. So that's how you have to first set this up. I'm going to come in here and say I want 3 rows of bolts in either direction, and I'll modify it again. Now I do want to set up the spacing of these bolts. Going back to my picture, if I have a 7-inch edge or a 7-inch wide kind of leg on this base plate, if you will, with an 1.5-inch edge distance, that gives me a 4-inch spread. Now again, if I'm thinking of an 1.5-inch edge distance and based on how much extra we've got, I'm figuring about 2.5 inches to get to the next row. So that's what I'm going to put in here. I'm going to go with a 2.5-inch and then 4-inch spacing, another 2.5-inch and then 4-inch spacing. By the way, when you're putting in values in a distance list like this, just make sure there's a space between them so that Tekla can recognize them as a separate value. So I'll modify the component, and you can see how they're starting to take on the shape that I need. So here are the 2 bolts on one of the legs, so to speak, of the plate, and then here are the other 2 bolts of that leg, or the other leg on the other side. So now what I can do is offset these, because the current array is centered on the column. So what we want to do is offset this. Now this could probably be figured out using math. I'm a little lazy and I like to just do a little trial and error on here. So I'll just start putting in numbers and modifying and kind of seeing what I get. So I just set an inch. Maybe I'll come up here to my measure tools and I'll just start measuring the horizontal distance. I know it needs to be centered on here. So right now I've got 2.25 and 1 3/4. Well, that's pretty obvious. If I want to have that centered, I need to move it 1/4 of an inch. And that's probably going to be the same thing on this side as well. So let me measure that here. So that's 1 3/4 and 2.25. So same thing. So I'll just go ahead and I will adjust this value up to 1.25 inches and modify. And now we should be able to see that centered on that column. I'll measure one of them just to make sure. 2 inches. Okay, I think we're good. So now that I have the bolts oriented correctly, like they're offset properly, and that might take a little bit of trial and error to get there. Now you want to remove the extra bolts that you don't need. So I don't need this outside corner bolt, and I obviously also don't need the ones inside of the column. So in order to do that, we have to go back to the Parameters tab. Now there are 2 options for removing bolts, one called Eliminate Bolt Numbers and one called Eliminate External Bolts. Now personally, my experience with Eliminate External Bolts is that it's not very reliable, so I tend to not use it. You can try it if you like. But the eliminate bolt numbers I have a lot of luck with. So the idea here is that each of these bolts has a number associated with it. So one of these bolts is bolt number 1, then bolt number 2, then bolt number 3, and then it goes back and says bolt number 4, 5, and 6. Now that may not be the orientation. So in order to find the orientation, what I'll do is I'll put in 2 numbers to start with. I'll say get rid of bolts number 1, space 2. So that'll get rid of the first and second bolt. And when I do that, I can see that the first two bolts on the right side over here have gone missing. So that now tells me that that's bolt number 1 and 2. So this out here is number 3, and I definitely want to get rid of that one. And then it starts back up at the other side, so that's bolt number 4 and 5. I want to keep 6, and then I want to get rid of 7 and 8. So that's what I'll type in here. I want to get rid of bolt number 3, space 4 and 5, and then keep 6 and get rid of 7 and 8. So I'll modify, and we can see how it gets rid of that corner bolt and gets rid of the internal bolts while keeping the bolts that I want. So the final thing I need to do is I need to cut that corner of the plate away that we no longer need. First thing that I like to do is come back here to the picture tab where we have the corners of the plate. There are dimensions for how big that clip or how big that notch should be. When I'm looking at a component like this, I try to follow the cone direction in the image. So if my cone is pointing in this direction, as it is in the model, my first attempt will be to try to match that up. So in that case, that would be this corner here that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 2.5 inches and 2.5 inches, and I'll modify. See if I got the right corner, which I did. You can see that it's currently a 45-degree cut because it's the same dimension in both directions. And then I need to go back to the parameters tab, and I need to tell it, don't just cut that corner, but make it a square cut, which is the very first option up here at the top. Now again, when I come into a component, I'm not quite sure which corner is which. What I'll usually do is follow the cone. It's not always 100% reliable, but that's where I'll start. So in this case, I'll go ahead and I'll say, all right, let's try number 3 for my corner cut, and I'll modify. And I didn't see anything happen, so that tells me that that's not the right corner. So instead, I'll go and try corner number 4, which was the same corner on the first tab. And now we can see that we have a corner clip. All right, so one of the last things you might take into consideration is the rotation of this plate. Now, I could just adjust my values, adjust my numbers to get this to change to different orientations. That's not always the easiest thing to do. Sometimes you just want to rotate it. Now, you can do that right here on the Parameters tab. You just want to make sure that you have the right option chosen here. So you want to choose not just to rotate the bolt group, but to rotate the entire plate. And then you can come in and type in something like 90 degrees. And you'll go ahead and rotate that plate by 90 degrees or 180 degrees or wherever you're trying to get with it. Okay? Now, one last thing. If you're in the U.S. Imperial environment, we do provide a couple of examples for you. If you go to your drop-down menu, you should see a corner base plate with holes, with L-shaped rods, and then with straight rods. So you can always load one of those as a starting point and then tweak it from there. But hopefully this video will help get you on the right foot as far as which options to change and how those are going to affect things. Now, as always, if you have any further questions, I always recommend you reach out to your local help desk. And I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching.